For One Night Only, a psychological study by Charles Rann Kennedy, published in the Idler magazine of 1898. Read by Bethina. Edmund Winstay, scholar and actor, had electrified the great heart of the metropolis. A flight of brilliant successes, each one more pronounced than its predecessor, does not commonly fall to the lot of even old and experienced players. But to him, young, unpractised, hitherto unknown, the gift had been granted. 1 short year and a half had worked the spell. His fame was made, and London went wild with enthusiasm. Affairs in the dramatic world for a long time had fallen flat. The usual productions had dribbled out religiously with damnable reiteration: problem plays, musical comedies, broad burlesques, occasionally romantic dramas in a society drawl, or vapid attempts at Shakespeare. Admirable staging, archaeological exactitude of scene and costume, elocution, gesture, technique generally, brought to an exquisite point of perfection, all these things were present, yet there was lacking that inner force, that Promethean flame, that terrible, wonderful, creative spirit, whereby alone the dry bones in the valley of art may take flesh and live. Receipts were falling off, syndicate shares were no longer at a premium, managers were becoming anxious. Things were so bad that even the critics were getting tired of endless adulation and longed for something good to vilify. Then Edmund Winstay appeared. The man looked great, the figure firm, well-knit, graceful as a Greek athlete's, instinct with noble movement, the clear-cut cameo face, calm with scholarship, and the pathetic beauty that comes of perfect mastery of passion. The great volcanic eyes, themselves unfathomable, yet possessed of that intuitive piercing quality which goes straight to human hearts. These, combined with a marvellous power of personal magnetism, without which no great player is possible, stamped Edmund Winstay with the birthmark of a genius, an inheritance his individual effort only tended more and more to ratify. His art was supreme, since it was based upon a right and healthy vision of life, carried into effect by continual sacrifice, and quick with that prophetic fire which lies at the heart of all high creative activity. People said of his playing that it left them with a larger sense of life, a kindlier love of humanity, a deeper insight into the divinity of our common nature. It was his Iago that first took London by storm. This was no mere stagey traitor of struts and eyebrows and obvious villainies of gesture, but the polished creation of Shakespeare's fancy. Subtle, watchful, assuming a careless cynicism to perfect delicacy of sting, a sting sheathed in velvet. The inevitableness of the character, the logic, the justification of it even, was brought home to the audience by a clever craft of impersonation, so that they felt a certain sympathy and communion with it, whilst not losing sight of the larger moral issues to which it was related. This was followed by his Romeo, who became, under his artistic touch, no longer the traditional moonstruck young man of mawkish tears and sentiment, but a splendid Catholic type of lofty and pure passion, bringing to a head the inchoate strivings and tendencies of all hearts, with a directness of idealism worthy of the mighty singer that conceived it. the distraction and pathos of Shylock, the crude, honest, well-meaning of Bottom, the weaver, so tenderly shown to balance his uncouthness and lack of imagination, Macbeth, physically brave, morally weak, Falstaff, unctuously human, Wolsey, of the great soul warped by statecraft and ambition, King Lear, all in turn were made to fascinate and charm by the glamour of Edmund Winstay's genius. Last of all came his Hamlet, a creation absolutely beyond criticism. It was the ultimate thing, the summum bonum of histrionic art. Those first-nighters who were fortunate enough to witness it declare that it stirred them in a way eclipsing all previous experiences. A subtle magnetism overpowered them. They were caught up and away, as it were, into the unseen essence of things, gifted with a new power of penetration, made instinct with the very soul of Shakespeare himself. There was no applause, no call before the curtain. All was dead, breathless silence, the silence of hearts loosened away from earth, sensing the spiritual alone. After the performance, there was no excitement. The audience left noiselessly. They were staggered, electrified, stunned. Then, to the surprise of the whole world, the next morning papers announced that the play was to be discontinued at once, and that Edmund Winstay had to set out for Tibet, having severed his connection with the stage forever. It was very strange. Edmund Winstay had certainly inherited his genius from his father, perhaps too something of that personal beauty which characterised him. Yet those who had known his mother, a frail little woman whose death had been the penalty of his birth, used to say the beauty chiefly came from her. However this may be, her early decease left a vivid impression upon both father and son. For not only did it cement closer their strong natural affinities, but it also imbued them with a deep sense of the continual spiritual presence of their loved one in their lives. The elder Winstay, lacking the wisdom of this world, had not suffered so phantom a circumstance as death to destroy his faith in the eternity of love, and had consequently remained single, not seeing the necessity of finding a mother for his child. The result was that young Edmund grew up with so deep a reverence for the ideal and so real an appreciation of spirit, he even failed the sowing of his wild oats, learning to know life pretty fairly without wallowing in its cesspools, and to perfect his own nature without desecrating others. Circumstances that no doubt accounted somewhat for his fine physique and unclouded serenity of genius. Edmund's father had not been fitted by nature to survive in the commercial struggle for existence, necessarily having ideals, and losing, by the death of his wife, the stimulus his retiring disposition needed for even rightful self-assertion, he drifted slowly but surely into that vortex of poverty which the delirium of our social system so often prepares for real nobility and worth. Consequently, when his son was only 15 years of age, the man died of a broken but unembittered heart, poorer than ever, yet still buoyantly confident of the ideal. The greatest dreamers are ever so, and therein lies the pity and the dignity of life. Edmund, thus thrown upon his own resources, found himself suddenly plunged into a battle wherein the individual fought against great odds. But the memory of his father, combined with the splendid dauntlessness of youth, nerved him to make a brave struggle for his life. It had always been the dead man's ambition that his son should follow his own beloved profession. The profession, as he proudly called it, that had proved so ill a mistress to himself and indeed the boy's abilities showed early promise in this direction, for he had that quick verve, that swift intuitive gift of discerning spirits, which laid hold of the central fact of each human heart he came in contact with, and realised it dramatically within himself. But, alas, opportunity is not always proportionate to capacity, and when Edmund Winstay, aged 16, sought worship in the temple of Thespis, it was as a very humble acolyte indeed he found function at her shrine. In other words, he became call-boy at a suburban theatre, there not being room in English art for such a monstrum horrendum as genius, when so many pretty ladies of a notoriety other than artistic, and so many rich young merchants' sons, desired to place their charms before a waiting world. In this lowly office, and in others of similar character, Edmund Winstay might have remained forever, except for a fortunate accident. A small part one night becoming vacant through the sudden illness of an actor, and the ordinary understudy suffering from a like mischance, Edmund, on the spur of the moment, volunteered to take it. It was given him dubiously, in default of a more likely person being available. He fulfilled it to such perfection that the public applauded heartily, and his manager gave him a permanent engagement. From that time his art career was assured. Passing quickly from part to part and rising rapidly in the estimation of the public, he soon became prominent enough to be decried of critics and regarded jealously by his dressing-room companions. A short time after, backed by the money of a speculative Jew, he scored his first great triumph as Iago, from which period the critics settled down with a sigh to the acknowledgment of his genius, and his dressing-room companions said, "Told you so." "Dear, dear," remarked the rich young merchant's sons aforementioned, "however did the beggar get his brains? Gutter boy, never went to college, dry bread and all that, don't you know? Awfully clever chap." They did not know that genius, like the kingdom of heaven, is within one, together with good breeding and other estimable matters, and that even a heredity of tallow cannot always supply that inward necessity from without. Edmund Winstay's success did not turn his head. Looking wisely into life, he saw secrets there, besides which the hollow plaudits, the gorgeous glamour, and temptation of society seemed very sorry bait indeed. He who sees the sun is not much dazzled by an electric glare. Throughout all, his sense of the spiritual and the affectionate memory of his father persisted, deepening day by day. Often and often, in the midst of some splendid passion of portrayal, in that consummate moment of creation when the artist drains the glory of skies into his soul and feels and knows the divine taking flesh within him, Edmund would think, "Ah, if only my father were with me now, to sympathise with me, to know pulse by pulse with me this rushing, burning rapture of creation, this madness of prophetic fire." Perhaps in the heart of such prayers as these, our loved ones, living fuller, freer lives than we yet dream of, hover nearer than we think. At last the triumphs of Edmund Winstay reached their height, and he prepared himself to fulfil the greatest role of all histrionic art, and place, in Hamlet, the crowning jewel upon the breastplate of his fame. He entered upon his task with an enthusiasm greater than ever he had experienced before. The passionate pathos of the character, its audacity, the wild young heart beating with hot blood, the imagination that scaled high heaven and scoured the abysses of deep hell, the long-drawn agony of deep questioning, the poor, pitiful human cry to the unknown that seemed so far off, yonder in the darkness, all found in turn an echo in the recesses of his own young life, all found a voice through him. Above all, he felt the ghostly influence of the play, for he too, like Hamlet, had a father out there, in the mysterious shadowland beyond. He too felt the tragic necessity for an answer to the great questions whereof life is so sadly made up. He too demanded from the heart of things some sign, some little word, to prove the eternal reality of our highest dreams, to deny that we are bound up solely with the fruitless whirl of atoms or the everlasting jugglery of devils. He too cried with the strange bitterness of the prophet, who feels a terrible necessity for reform, yet knows the tremendous odds against which his soul must fight. Oh, for some sign, some ghostly proof beyond all powers of doubt, whereby the prophet might loosen the lips of thunder and waken the world undaunted. The rehearsals were long and many. Edmund Winstay and his comrades were wrought to a high state of feverish excitement. The public, hearing hints of the delights in store, caught the contagion. Everyone was on tiptoe with expectancy. At last the great night came. The house was crowded. Every seat had been booked for weeks. All the leading representatives of art and literature were present, breathless with interest and anticipation. The play began. A strange solemnity shivered through the house as the curtain arose on the first scene, and the audience sank into a dead silence. The parts were played to perfection, the drilling of the last few months under so inspiring a master as Winstay not having been without good fruit. Perhaps the ghost was a little mechanical, and in one place he forgot a cue, but this, together with the slight fluffiness of the lines, always excusable on a first night, comprised the only noticeable defects. The appearance of Edmund Winstay in the second scene was electrical. His very presence brought home the tragic significance of the play and held the audience fascinated. The intense absorption of Hamlet's sorrow, set off so strikingly by the brilliant background of the jocund court, the quick alternations of passion, grief, irony, the dignity of icy separation from callous joy, the half-concealed contempt for the usurper king, culminating in the bitter outburst, "Oh God! Oh God, how weary, stale, flat, and unprofitable seems to me all the uses of this world." The after-change of kindly greeting towards Horatio, finally, the quickened supernatural suggestions on hearing of his father's spirit that only too readily responded to the anxious yearnings of his heart. Each passed into perfect expression and made Winstay's Hamlet a living thing. The audience had forgotten everything but the story before them. Critics, artists, idle men and women of fashion, humdrum workaday people of every kind, all their foolish differences dissolving, became one in the bonds of sympathy, one in the brotherhood of art. Their rapt attention being concentrated on Edmund Winstay, his soul caught the fire of their magnetism, and to the fund of his own special powers was added that hypnotism of audience so well known to psychology, wherein player and spectator unite in the process of creation. Behind the scenes, it was just the same. Managers, prompters, carpenters, shifters, gasmen, all were intent on the play, lost in wonder. Perhaps it was this latter fact that occasioned the 2 or 3 hitches in the fourth scene. The men at the Limes seemed a little dazed, and the fluffiness which had occurred slightly before became in this scene more decidedly pronounced. This was the most conspicuous on the appearance of the ghost, for instead of the green limes shining full upon him, they wobbled incontinently out. The circumstance evidently disconcerted the ghost, for instead of making the movements assigned to him at rehearsal, he wandered vaguely about as though half stupefied. The fact, however, was hardly noticed by the audience, whose attention was being riveted by the magnificent playing of the principal character. It was certainly the climax of Edmund Winstay's powers. The critics to this day agree that the speech wherein Hamlet first addressed the ghost, angels and ministers of grace defenders, as delivered by him, was utterly beyond parallel in dramatic art. He poured out into it all the passion, all the love, all the long spiritual questionings of his youth. It was his own father in the other world he cried upon, his own troubled chaos of tumultuous thought he strove to give shape to. He himself was Hamlet, and Hamlet he. At the end of this speech, a violent agitation seized the ghost. His whole frame quivered as with an ague. His eyes started aghast and ogled horribly. The face writhed convulsively into another semblance. At the same time, a supernatural mist around him, and the people shivered with an unknown horror. Icy chills like the cold, clammy fingers of death seemed to touch them. Afterwards they said the stagecraft was supreme. But Edmund Winstay knew he looked upon none other than his own dead father. The rest of the play went on without a hitch. There was no need for the limes. The ghost brought its own light. A deathly silence reigned throughout the theatre. All were bewildered, paralysed, dumb. But those who were present that night declare they shall never forget the dreadful realism of that awful shape and the wind-like whisper of its voice. It froze them to the bones. It shivered to their inmost souls till they became spectral too, cold, cold, ice-cold, swept by silent winds, bare with unutterable nakedness. The world never wholly learned the meaning of the mystery, for Edmund Winstay bound his staff and company to silence. But a few days ago, the writer of this story met an old actor who, on inquiry, turned out to be the very man engaged by Winstay to play the ghost. He detailed the whole circumstances of the story. "Sir," he said solemnly in conclusion, "the meaning I do not propose to unravel, that is beyond me. But throughout the rehearsals of that play I always felt an uncanny influence upon me, as though I were not complete master of myself. My every movement seemed to be modified by some force outside me, to gestures other than those laid down. My lips and tongue, while they worked freely, were not wholly responsive to my will. They appeared to be controlled from without. This influence, spiritual, magnetic, demonic, call it what you will, came to a climax on the night of the show when I felt impelled to yield to it altogether. At the moment of the spirit's materialization, I lost all consciousness. And believe me, sir," he continued impressively, "at precisely that point of time, an unaccountable event occurred at my diggings 6 miles away. My landlady, as good and wide-awake a soul as ever lived, hearing from the direction of my bedroom a tremendous noise like the precipitation of a heavy body to the ground, rushed upstairs to learn what was the matter. Judge of her dismay and surprise when she found me there, clad in my ghost robes, in a dead faint, on the floor." That was For One Night Only by Charles Rann Kennedy. Kennedy was known as an American playwright, although when this story was written he was neither American nor a playwright. He was born in 1871 in Derby, England, into a well-bred family. His grandfather had been a classicist, but strangely his own education doesn't seem to have been a priority for his parents, and he started his working life as a humble office boy. He wrote short stories, such as this one, which appeared in The Idler in 1898, when he was in his late 20s. This was also the year of his marriage. He also wrote articles and poems for periodicals. He became an actor, so there is an autobiographical element to this story, and later a press agent, playwright and theatrical manager. He emigrated to the United States and settled in Millbrook, New York. He taught at Bennett Junior College, Millbrook, along with his wife, the English-born Shakespearean actress Edith Wynne Mathison. They retired to Los Angeles and died there in the 1950s. I hope you enjoyed this ghost story, which I'm pretty sure you've not heard before. If you enjoy ghost stories that you haven't heard already and are a bit obscure, have a look in the audiobook section of my YouTube channel where you'll find some more to entertain you. And as always, thank you for listening.